kind of love how Polyphony's choice of bringing the Challenger quote-unquote back in a different form, but still the newer shaped Challenger in a general sense, is to just completely skip what we used to have in the form of the SRT8 in Gran Turismo 6, and then just go all the way past the Hellcat, all the way to the Demon, which is great. I mean, 840 horsepower straight out of the box. It weighs less than 2 tons. I mean, it's not light by any stretch. It's 1,941 kilos, but it is a muscle car, so you can kind of forgive it for that. Of course, supercharged already. You can actually tune this thing up to nearly 1,200 horses. Add NOS on top of that, drop the weight. You got yourself an absolute missile in a straight line, and the one that I'm using here at Road Atlanta is using that much horsepower, although I believe I still had it on sports tyres. You'll be able to see at the bottom of the screen if I did or not. But in terms of using this car, I actually alluded to this when I talked about 1.40 as a whole. It's surprisingly, at least to me, forgiving to drive. And many people said in the comments stuff like that it's got the wider tyres to help with the grip, and all of that is true. Of course, that's great for getting the power down, but the Challenger isn't necessarily, at least from what I've heard, even from people who've owned them, it's not necessarily the best thing through corners, because it's not really designed to be. It's basically a really big, really powerful brick of a car. And I say that as somebody who, of course, loves classic and modern American cars. I've owned plenty of them at this point, and I know exactly what they're like, both performance and not. This one, though, really did pleasantly surprise me by just how easy it is to pilot, even with 1,200 horsepower, this thing around the track. Now, the price tag is also pretty good, which isn't too surprising. You wouldn't expect it to be that expensive. It's 200,000 credits, of course, from the Dodge dealer, and 200 grand, I mean, even without a money exploit, that's easy to get. In terms of the point level, it sits reasonably high. I mean, for a muscle car, maybe, which is 624 points. And of course, when you modify it, that's going to jump up quite a bit more. But even so, for something with well over 800 horsepower stock, using the term stock very loosely here, of course, that's not actually bad. Around the 600 point region, even with a high amount of weight, Bugatti style, much like a GTR, a Veyron, a Chiron, those kind of machines with the right tuning can absolutely be a weapon, and this one for sure can be as well. And to be honest, you don't really need to give it necessarily more power. 800 is already more than enough to destroy most AI cars in the game, even with Sophie turned on, because again, if you just focus on dropping the weight, put it on some even stickier tyres, drop the centre of gravity with the springs, stiffen up the dampers a bit, maybe a bit of camber, and of course some better brakes, well, you've immediately got yourself a track day weapon. And it could be kind of fun to maybe even detune this just a little bit, or even leave it standard and turn it into kind of like the Challenger equivalent of a ZL1, kind of that more track day focused, or a GT350R Mustang, and make it that, well, like I said, more track day kind of approach to a muscle car or a pony car. To me, the Challenger has always been my favourite of these modern muscle cars. The newer Mustangs don't really do it for me. The new Camaros, sometimes they do, sometimes not so much. This one though, I mean, from the SRT8 onward, the Challenger's always been a pretty cool car to me. Straight line only kind of mentalities don't really bother me. I've always been a fan of the TVR Speed 12, so clearly I don't care about cornering that much. But the fact that this actually can take corners pretty well is such a great bonus on top. I'm not going to go ahead and say that this thing will necessarily, beat 911s and GTRs, at least when they're tuned properly, of course, but it's not the kind of car that you go into it expecting that anyway. This is essentially kind of like the Viper was, and the reason why I like the Viper is the same reason why I like this, at least in concept, and that is that it's basically a drivable cartoon. It's a vehicle that isn't designed to have any semblance of sanity to it. The whole point in this modern age that we're in, it flies in the face of the environment, of moving towards electric stuff, and even though of course Dodge is going that way, as pretty much all manufacturers are, I love that this is just their last Hail Mary, just making it that crazy, overpowered, ballistic missile of a car that has more horsepower, at least from what I can recall, than any production Viper certainly ever had. I believe the most powerful Viper actually pales in comparison to even a Hellcat, let alone a Demon, so I love the fact that they just went so crazy with this. And even if you rewind the clock to 10, 15 years ago, back when something like a Koenigsegg CCX was a big deal, with 806 horsepower. I mean, this thing's putting out more than that now. That is how far we've come in terms of the kind of ridiculous horsepower that vehicles are getting, and it is amazing to see the acceleration of change in the performance car world, both in real life and just as a snapshot of that here in the game. Like I said, I do love the fact that they completely skipped over the SRT8. Of course, the SRT8 would have probably had a pretty damn good amount of horsepower anyway. Those 6.1 litre Hemi engines tend to be pretty good in Gran Turismo for tuning, and of course in real life as well. But this one, it's an obvious choice. I am surprised, to be honest, that they didn't just stick to the Hellcat like they did with the Charger, but I love that they skipped that and went straight to this one. Of course, it's great to have it in the game. For those who do love the Challenger, of course it's like the holy grail of that pretty much. And I would love to hear your thoughts down below. If it's a car that you were maybe disappointed by, perhaps you were looking forward to it and it didn't quite live up to what you wanted, or maybe you were pleasantly surprised, or somewhere in between. And of course, if you were looking forward to it and it ended up being something that you absolutely love, of course I'd love to hear about that down below as well. And in particular, it could be interesting to see what you guys have been using this for. Have you found it to be particularly useful for a certain event, maybe a certain power level, a certain point level? Could it be an OP vehicle perhaps, under certain circumstances? Of course you can drop all that down below, and we are not yet done with all of the car reviews in GT7 Spec 2, so stick around for those of course, but until tomorrow I'll see you then. And for now, thanks for watching.